But yeah, you're right, kind of lied to everyone here. They're actually 4 projects. I mean, it's 3 teams, 4 projects. So I'm working on the same team. I'm excited to be here and tell you a little bit about our work. So Chris and Cindy, Carl, and our mentor Youngjin, who isn't here, unfortunately. So there are, for those of you who don't know, thousands and thousands of Chicagoans every night who don't have a home. One of the most basic things that we all rely on for stability in our lives. And this summer we have been working with the Chicago Alliance to End Homelessness, predicting and evaluating different pathways to stable housing. So for folks who don't have a home in Chicago, sort of that complex path that they take through a very complicated system to eventually get, hopefully, to a place where they actually have a stable place to sleep at night. So the Chicago Alliance to End Homelessness is a backbone organization for a complex of over 200 service organizations locally organized around Chicago, and they provide all different kinds of services. So the provider might provide housing. There are different kinds of housing. They might also provide job training or help with a resume. There are things like food stamps and other kinds of programs. So the Chicago Alliance really is the institution that tries to bring all of these organizations together to provide a sort of continuous care through Chicago for those of us who don't have homes. About 12 years ago, the Chicago Alliance put together Chicago's plan to end homelessness. It hasn't ended. 2 years ago, they came together with a much richer set of people and a bigger process and instituted Chicago's Plan 2.0, Home for Everyone. And one of the main considerations in Plan 2.0 has been to integrate this system of 200 organizations around the city to provide, to do exactly what I was saying, like provide a more continuous set of resources for folks. And the Alliance came to us and said, well, we've got all these different types of programs, particularly housing types. So there are emergency shelters that people can stay at for a short period of time, all the way up to what's called permanent supportive housing, which is you're granted a home indefinitely, and you get wraparound services, social services, very intensive case management. And so the Chicago Alliance wants to know, with the limited resources that we have, the limited energy and financial resources, where should we be putting these? And furthermore, given a particular person or given a set of people, what kinds of programs, what kinds of interventions work best for these kinds of people? So we've been working with data collected over the last 15 years or so, although we actually threw out most of that, unfortunately, because the quality, speaking to a couple of comments from the last presentation, the quality was not good enough because the case managers are focusing on helping the people, not in entering data. They're working and data has improved. So the last 2 years of data we've been working primarily with. And we dove in. And we're still working, but the 2 primary findings that we've discovered that predict sort of whether or not someone will end up stably housed, which is one of the eventual outcomes that we want to see, are what sort of income and cash they have, or income and non-cash benefits they have flowing in. So are they working or are they not working? Do they have Social Security income, but also are they enrolled in food stamps and those kinds of things? And also in an interesting one, perhaps not too surprising, the housing type program the housing program type that they're enrolled in. So this is in some sense kind of a no-duh model, but this is really important because they actually haven't seen this before. Folks who are in permanent supportive housing, so that's you're granted a home indefinitely and you get wraparound services, well, they end up stably housed in the long run. And that's pretty important. I mean, it seems obvious, but for a long time this actually wasn't the primary model. People would be granted short-term houses or just said, given emergency shelters and they'd say, okay, like get get sober, get employed, whatever the problems are, like deal with them in here, and then once you're good, then we'll give you stable housing. And recent research and also the data that we've been working with shows actually the best way to get somebody stably housed is to stably house them. So this is really exciting. I think we're all really excited to continue working on it. The Chicago Alliance is going to be using this and other results to help them plan over the coming years, both financial resource allocation, but also how can we sort of tune the system or better integrate the system so that if somebody becomes homeless, they have the resources that they need in order to become stably housed again. So I'm happy to take questions. Please.
Looks like to me the most interesting part is the small group of people who don't end up stably housed.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of improving the system, have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So anecdotally from case managers we've talked to, so unstably housed can actually be broken up into two groups. There's people who end up temporarily housed, which can be anything from I'm making do living on the street to I'm living temporarily with friends or family, but I'm not stably housed. This is not a place that I'm going to be living long term. There's also a small group of people who end up in institutions, so that could be either a hospital or a psychiatric facility of some kind, a drug abuse facility, and this is for if they're there for more than 90 days. So if it's just like a brief trip and then they're back in, that doesn't count. We're talking about people who end up in the long run because this particular program didn't have the services that they need. So that's considered unstable housing. For the people who go from here to there, some of it is going to be people who don't comply with the program. So there are some programs that are like abstinence-based, so if they're using drugs chaotically or using drugs at all and the program finds out, they'll be ejected. But for the most part, this is people who are ending up in jail or who are dying. And it's sort of strange to talk about unstably housed, but in this case we're saying they died before 6 months, meaning they didn't get here fast enough and they had low enough health that there wasn't.
I'm also interested in those who are in an emergency situation and then end up stably housed. Can you talk about emergency, like what it means to be like in an emergency situation and the role of rental assistance maybe in this?
Yeah, it sounds like maybe you know more about rental assistance than I do, but I can definitely talk about this. So emergency shelters are places that you can stay for between 1 and 90 days. Sometimes they go over, but they're not supposed to. And then after that, I mean, this is actually the ideal path that we would take. So if I end up homeless, I can go to an emergency shelter and I can work with a case manager there, and they can either find me, they can work with me to find a place to stay permanently with family if that's possible, or I might end up in permanent supportive housing. So this is actually maybe misleading, but I can go from emergency shelter into permanent supportive housing, and if I'm there for at least 6 months, then I'm considered stably housed. But there are definitely other possibilities, like living with friends or family, or ending up renting, or very rare case buying, but usually renting. And rental assistance programs are definitely a part of that. Does that answer your question enough? Or?
Yeah, no, I just was curious just because I know rental assistance makes a huge differentiation between people who are technically even sporadically living with family and people who have a certified letter from either a church or a facility saying that they're technically homeless. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting that it also breaks down half and half, only maybe just because homeless people may not know that they need to have certification that they're homeless to get rental assistance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's one component. Another huge component is that a lot of these services require identification, and a lot of the homeless folks in Chicago don't have identification, and that takes at least 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get. So if you're only here for 3 months, that's this part, right? That's what's not working. Yeah, I saw a hand here, and then I got those two. Yeah.
So I'm interested in another flow based on what you just said. So emergency emergency to short term, where does that flow? Do people flow from emergency to short term? That's considered unstable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason that is because we really want to be getting people stably housed. If you're in an emergency shelter and then you end up in temporary housing because there's not enough stable housing or other reasons, that's really not ideal. I mean, we want to get people stably housed.
Yeah, I guess I just like to see some differentiation between, you know, making a step from emergency to short-term housing and going from emergency back to I'm on the street or
For sure. I think that
from house to house or in a
Yep.
car.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and that's something we're working on, and that's part of the sort of like complexity of this. Quite frankly, I didn't want to put too many lines up here, but that is something that we're working on, particularly people who are in a program, exit the program, and then come back into a different program, because that's something, recidivism, and it's really not something that we want to see, but happens all too often, so for sure.
Going from one program to another program, like if you're progressing eventually.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with you. It's in the pipeline, unfortunately. I mean, yeah.
No, this is good.
Yeah.
No doubt model, but it's
For sure. Here and then back there.
This is a great descriptive graphic, but I mean, really talking about setting a policy recommendation, you need to really single with the normal selection effects that of the devil this entire area of research for its entire long history. So, what's up?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. We're producing these graphics along with more technical things that I didn't want to put up here. So crosstabs broken down by what kinds of housing programs. So even within here, we have like interim housing versus blanking. Give me some, okay, well anyway, there are a bunch of different housing programs in here. And then, even within these, there are a lot of different variables. So we're going to be generating diagrams like this for the people who are in committees who don't want to see numbers, because a lot of the folks who are working in this organization are not familiar with data. Actually one of the great things about
Yeah, but I mean,
okay.
you can analyze yourself later.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, you're gonna this picture here suggests that you should dramatically expand permanent housing.
Yep.
It
does not. Does it?
Let me finish. The thing is that because it looks like this thing is like, it works for it like totally works. But the thing is that there's an enormous selection effects about what kind of people end up in the permanent housing program type.
Yes.
So your crosstabs of the different types of programs and more complicated flow diagrams, that's not going to help you.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with you. We're working on some proximity matching methods as well, similar to the Memphis folks. We were actually talking about that on the way over
I mean,
here.
this is describing the data, it's not making any predictions of the future, so
Yeah.
it's not saying who came in and who's likely to have open effects.
Yeah.
So
We can-
it's just describing history.
Yeah, we also have models that we've been working with that don't take into account these or break these down into like, okay, if you're in permanent housing, given, what do those different populations look like, and can we predict whether or not you'll end up stably housed or not based on things besides program type. Okay, in the back, and then I've got 3 more.
So I'm kind of curious about whether cost was part of the analysis. Permanent obviously has a high success rate, but I'm curious about cost per success, if that was looked into at all, or can you speak to that a little bit?
That was definitely way out of scope of our project this summer. That's something that has been researched in other areas by other people. The general consensus these days is that in the long run, permanent housing is lower cost because you don't end up with people on the street getting sick, going to hospitals, going to emergency rooms, stuff like that. But that is not, that was not within the scope of this project. Yes.
Before I begin with the presentation, you made a wonderful comment that sounds like music to my ears. You said that data was chaotic when you started, and 2 years ago, the data had started to shift up. Is that a part of your fellowship, or have you saw how this works?
No, so that was actually a shift in management. quite honestly. So the information system that generates all of this data was managed by not the Chicago Alliance prior to 2 years ago, and after the Chicago Alliance took it over, they dedicated a lot of resources to making the data better. So they've started collecting more data, and also they have people in a lot of different organizations around the city that are specifically dedicated to that organization, working with the case managers, training them, checking over their data, and stuff like that. So,
And part of the goal is the organizations we work with, honestly, are sort of in the top end of the data collection and data storage, right? And the goal is sort of, if we can use their data, they're spending a lot of time collecting data for them, then if we can use that data to show them what could be done, other organizations who haven't been motivated to collect data, at least start saying, oh, if we had this data, we could do this too. So that's kind of part of the goal, is to take these organizations that are trying to be better than the average, but then hopefully disseminate this so that the lower down people can start doing the same.
I was wondering whether there's a specific information gateway website or portal that would just easily jot down for anybody you see on the street who seems desperate.
for this data, or do you mean for?
It sounds to me like you're suggesting that there are possible paths for people that they could embark on in order to improve their conditions. And so, oftentimes you walk down the streets and see different people panhandling. You feel for
I see.
it, right?
Yes, yes.
And so it's like, okay, well, if I can't help you and say with cash or something like that, then is there another way, like say, okay, well, there's a public library here and they have access to computers and you can go there and there's a website for that I recommend for you to go because they've got this, etc. So I'm asking you about
Yeah.
specific ones that you have. Is it like a portal for people that you go to?
So, I'm not going to quite answer, well, no, I'll try to answer your question as best I can. So there isn't a main portal for like, I need housing tonight, where can I go to get it, as far as I know. But there are, I could be wrong about that, I'm seeing it, okay.
Police department themselves.
Police, yeah, police, or I think generally, if you go to a public library and do you know more about this?
I
Okay.
worked with a social services agency on the south side.
Yeah.
And one of the issues, not only in Chicago, but literally around the metropolitan area, is the lack of coordination within all of the agencies that serve a population that you could say generally is at risk. And additionally, many of their databases don't track a person who comes in, leaves, and comes back. They're treated as two people, not the same person. The group I was working with was actually using a flat file database, and they couldn't track anything over an intermediate time period.
Yeah.
And even the agencies that is coordinating it on a metropolitan basis doesn't necessarily, and I think you made the point, which is very accurate, is that sitting in this room, we understand data. But sitting out there, people don't understand not only why they would collect data, but what would they want to do with it, and why would you want to do it, and how do we ask people to get the right data?
Yeah.
It's very disheartening to go into a frontline agency and know people are really doing their hardest to serve and have no idea what to do with the data that they're collecting, and that they see people come in, a month later will go through and they'll deliver all kinds of services, including emergency food, housing, other services. A month later they disappear, 6 months later they come back, but they're literally treated as a new person that has never been there before. So it's really disheartening in some ways when you work with that. So I applaud you for that, because it's really a necessary function.
Yeah, so that's part of it. The other half of the answer to your question is that there is something called the Centralized Referral System, CRS or CRIS, which you can go to and you can sign up for, but it's quite literally a list of everyone who wants housing in the city of Chicago, and they're ranked by their vulnerability index, so how likely they are to be negatively impacted by the fact that they're homeless. So that basically, it's much more complicated than this, but it's approximately like, how likely are you to die because you're homeless? And they prioritize based on that. we're shifting the system to draw more from the top of that list, but there are still a lot of problems with that. People sign up, and then 9 months later, they come up to the top of the list, but who knows where they are because they're homeless and they don't have a phone and they don't have an address. But I think what was said earlier is definitely true. There's a really long way to go with this. Yeah.
So
Matt.
a lot of cities have a system called 2-on-1. We don't. The Lodge does 2-on-1. It is supposed to be exactly what somebody just asked about, which is a place that you call and say, I need social services. They connect you with services. We don't have that. However, we do have an organization called Purple Mind. Purple Mind. Yeah. They actually they were one of our potential partners. But that's the closest thing I know of in Chicago to a centralized social services.
That's a good point. I think if the city provided a system where you would go in and tell them a little bit more about yourself, and point you to a place which is most likely to help you in whatever social service you need, as opposed to a generic directory. It's a more personalized. If you go to this program, we're nowhere close to that point, even predicting these things. But that's the direction.
That's eventually where we and the Chicago Alliance want this research to go. We're just nowhere near that again. Cool. All right. Yeah. Let's wrap up. If you have further questions or comments, please come talk to me. I love talking about this. Chris also knows a lot about this.
And if you want to know more about these projects, we have 2 opportunities. One is this Friday. We have a happy hour in our office. So if you go to dssg.uchicago.edu or just search for Data Science Social Good, that you can sign up for a happy hour that we're doing this Friday, 5 o'clock. We're at State and Jackson. And the second opportunity is Tuesday, next Tuesday. We've got an event where we're presenting all our projects. It's in 1871. Again, you can sign up. That's the bit.ly link over here. You're welcome to come talk to all the teams, all the people who are working on this.
Don't you have an event next Thursday?
No. We have one this Friday, and we have one next Tuesday.
Isn't that the Chicago Python Users Group? Is that what you're referring to?
That's this Thursday.
This Thursday?
This Thursday. Yeah, this
Aha.
Thursday. But you guys all not be interested in Python, so.
Zero overlap, right? Okay. So, yeah, one more round of applause for our presenters.